Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our final webinar in our Planning for Your Financial Future series. My name is Carly Toney. I'm the graduate assistant at the Financial Success Center, and I'll let our presenter for the day introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dorian Philpott. I am a money coach at The Money Spot. I'm a junior economics major, political science minor. I'm excited to talk to you guys today about large purchases.
All right, so we'll go ahead and get into it.
Okay, so like I said, today's topic is planning for your financial future, go big or go home. Like I said, we're talking about large purchases. So that's anything that you don't physically have the money in your bank account at that exact moment to pay for the full product. So I'm talking about houses, maybe some cars, pieces of furniture. Sometimes jewelry is a big one with people, and weddings, like things that cost a lot of money dispersed in a lot of places, expensive. So when you start to think about, oh man, like I want to make a large purchase, there's a few questions that I feel like are really important for you to start asking yourself. So number one is now the right time for this purchase? And that might be one of the most important things that you can be asking yourself, because I think it's really important for you to think through, okay, is this something that I need tomorrow? Is this something I can wait on a little bit longer? So then you can kind of understand how urgent that need is, or if it's more like of a want, something that can wait a little bit longer until you're have thought through a little bit more of the financial impacts that it might have on you. The next question you want to ask is, how much will my future payments be and how long will I be paying those payments for, right? So if you are making a large purchase, more than likely you will need a loan or something of that sort, or a mortgage, I guess. And that will have some sort of set payment amount that you owe every month. And it could be for a specific period of time. Now, that period of time could be a few months, it could be a few years, or when you think about mortgages, it could be 30 plus years, right? That you're thinking about, how long am I going to have to pay that amount of money that I agreed to upfront? So just something to consider. Next, you want to think about interest rates, right? So if you're thinking about those initial or those payments that you have to make and the length of time that you're paying that purchase off, there's also going to be interest that's added into that loan. So that's like additional money that you will be owing, that like in addition to the principal amount that you borrowed, that you'll have to think about. And you want to try to pick loans that have the lowest possible interest rates that you can, because that means less money that you have to pay back on top of that original purchase. And lastly, you want to be thinking about what does this purchase add to the future value of my life? So that's also where you get into the conversation, like I said, about needs versus wants. Is this something that is going to add value to my life today? Or is this something that might not add any value, but it's just something that I really, really want? You kind of have to start thinking about, like, what should I be spending money on versus what can wait? And also even thinking about net worth, things like houses, and some types of jewelry and stuff like that, and some cars, I guess, depending on what kind of car it is. Those are things that are assets and that are adding value to your life. And when you're calculating your net worth, those are good things that are going to be worth money to you at the end. So those are the kinds of things that you want to be looking for, thinking about as far as large purchases go. So there's a few things that you will need in order to make a large purchase. So I'm kind of thinking in terms of like houses and that type of thing. So when you're thinking about houses and mortgages, you definitely want to make sure you have the down payment prepared. So that is some percentage of the total amount of money or the total price of that product that you would need to be prepared to pay up front. So with mortgages, it could be anywhere from 3 to 20% as a down payment. So that'll just be something that you want to be thinking about, like, oh man, how much do I think I need to start saving up for this? And the larger the down payment is that you make, the smaller your mortgage will be down the line. So I have something in my eye. So when you're thinking about interest rates, right? If you have a smaller mortgage, that means that over the life of the mortgage, you will have paid a smaller amount of interest. And that's good because that's less additional money that you have. But if you have a smaller down payment, your mortgage will be larger and there will be more interest that you have to pay back at the end or over the life of the mortgage. Next thing you want to think about is good credit. We will talk in depth about what good credit looks like, what that means, what kind of steps you need to be taking, but having good credit definitely is useful when making large purchases or applying for loans and mortgages, that type of thing, because it shows that you are a responsible customer who the lender is willing to lend to because they are confident that you will repay your debt. And lastly, something that you want to think about, especially for houses and new cars, is proof of income. They want to see that you will be able to pay back the money because at the end of the day, that's what's important to them, is getting their money back, getting the lender's money back plus interest. So they want to see that you have some sort of income type statements and that they monitor your debt to income ratio. Okay, so when you're thinking, like I said, about down payments, that's probably something you're going to want to start saving up for. So now we're going to talk a little bit about savings goals. So there's a few steps that you need to do in order to save successfully for that down payment. Number one is opening up that savings account. If you don't have the savings account, it might be a little bit difficult to save up that amount of money that you need. So you want to look for a bank that has low to no fees, where you know that your funds and your accounts will be secured and insured. So that really means that you do need to do a little bit of research about different banking partners and the different types of benefits that they have and some of their policies to make sure that you're finding the right account for you, because not everybody is looking for the same thing in a savings account, but just pay attention to those types of things and what makes the most sense to you as far as a savings account goes. Next thing that you want to do that I think is so super important and can really make a difference for you is naming that savings account. So you want to try to name it something that is kind of, I won't say sparks joy. I'm not going to be talking about Marie Kondo, but something that kind of triggers that goal in your head. So it's easier for you to remember. And when you just see it, you stay like a little bit more motivated to work towards that down payment. So like one of my coworkers, Mia, she always goes for the beautiful kitchen. That's the name of her savings account. And it's just motivating her towards that savings for that down payment for that house that she's after with the beautiful kitchen. So whatever type of name makes sense for you, pick it and use it, because I really do feel like it'll help you remember why you're doing what you're doing. The next thing you want to do is try to make your savings as automatic as you possibly can. When you set up automatic transfers on a schedule, it kind of cuts out that, oh man, like I don't really want to put the money into the savings account for this thing. I'd rather spend it on something else. If it's automatic on a schedule that you set for yourself, you don't even have to think about it. That money is just going there, and you will continuously see that savings account grow and help you get to that number that you're looking for that down payment a little bit faster than if you don't make automatic transfers and you have to kind of like think through every time, well, how much money do I want to save? How much do I want to put into it? Like, or if you forget, things like that. Making it automatic cuts out that excuse for you. And the last thing that you really want to do is work on tracking your cash flow. In the next few slides, we'll talk a little bit more about what exactly that means, but tracking your cash flow is so important to paying attention to your progress towards reaching that savings goal for that down payment. If you don't kind of look at all your spending habits and all your sources of income, then it won't be as easy for you to kind of figure out where to make the space and to continue to make the space for that savings goal in your cash flow. So like I was just talking about, cash flow is super important. Cash flow is all of your sources of income minus all of your expenses, and cash flow is the number that results or the difference. So you want to think about, how can I maximize my income, right? So if that means, so that's thinking about whatever jobs you might have, if you're picking up like extra side gigs or whatever it is, you really want to make sure that you are diligently paying attention to all of those sources of income and maximizing them to help you, again, get to that savings goal a little bit quicker. The next thing that you can do is try to minimize your expenses. I know that that's difficult because there are definitely a number of fixed and variable expenses that you have to spend money on in some capacity, but you just want to be trying to figure out ways to like cut out those things that you might not need. So like for me, that means I got to cut out some of my Starbucks trips because I don't need them in order to help me reach that savings goal that I have a little bit faster for myself. And lastly, you also want to be thinking about the unexpected when it comes to cash flow. You can do a pretty good job of estimating what your income and your expenses will be the more you practice cash flow. But I think, as we've all seen, you never know what can happen to you. So you may want to make sure that also in your cash flow, you're creating a space for some sort of emergency savings, so that in the event something does happen and you have to spend an amount of money on it, you have that emergency savings to use towards it. And it'll be a little bit easier for you to quickly get back on track with that cash flow that you kind of thought through originally. So you don't have to have too much lapse in your savings towards that down payment. So now we'll talk a little bit more about how to actually build that cash flow that I was talking about. So with income, like I said, you want to be paying attention to all of the sources of income that you have and knowing how often you're being paid. Like if you have a pretty fixed salary, like how much money are you getting paid? And then again, what can I do to be paid more money? Does that mean I need to figure out if I can get a raise, or if I need to get some side jobs, or that I can sell some clothes online, something like that? If you feel like you need more income based on looking at your cash flow, there's things that you can do for that to help you get to that savings goal faster. Next, you want to be thinking and writing down and keeping track of all your expenses. So what are your fixed expenses? Things like rent, student loans, maybe some utilities, but not all are fixed. So those types of things. And then you also want to be thinking about, what are my variable expenses? So maybe gas, groceries, I don't know, clothes, those types of things can be variable expenses that you know you're going to spend money on it every month, but you don't quite know how much money that you might be spending, or it might change from month to month, just given the circumstances. And you also want to be thinking about, in terms of expenses, your bills, right? Like I said, so rent, like subscriptions, utilities, those are all bills that you have that you need to be paying on a regular basis. So you want to make sure that you have the money in your cash flow, and that you've accounted for those things that you have to spend money on every month to make sure that you can pay them on time and in full. Because like we'll talk about with credit, that paying on time and in full is really, really important to making you look like a really responsible borrower. Next, with cash flow, the really great thing about it is that you can use it to estimate what you're spending. If you are consistent with your cash flow, you'll know, okay, well, how much money am I bringing in every month? Because you've already done that work in the income section. And you'll also kind of know, based on the expenses section, how much am I actually spending in a month? And you can kind of use that to make predictions for the next few months. There could be a little bit of variability because, like I said, things happen. You spend money on some other things every month, but you'll start to get pretty good at that estimating section. And then again, like I said, it's really, really, really important with cash flow that you actually track what you're spending on and your income. If you're not tracking and if you're not paying attention, how can you do that estimation? You'll never really know. You'll always be like, well, I did it this month, but then I skipped 3 months and now I'm trying to do it again. Like that consistency is really important, not only to cash flow, but to savings goals and then to eventually getting to that large purchase that you want. Okay, so like I said, next is really important is credit. So credit is calculated. It's like a calculated thing, but it's really important that you know that when you're making a large purchase and you're asking to borrow a certain amount of money, that that lender is going to be checking your credit report to determine how much money to actually lend to you. So it is a detailed record of your entire, or not necessarily your entire credit history, but your credit history, at least over at least a 7-year period. So like I said, it helps to determine, number one, if that lender would like to lend to you, and B, how much money they want to lend to you, and then C, what kind of interest rate are they looking at for you? So you want to make sure that you are really paying attention to your credit report, because then you'll be able to start doing what you need to make sure it looks as good as it possibly can to get the most amount of money that you can, or that fits kind of your needs for the lowest interest rate possible. So there are 3 credit bureaus that produce credit reports. Number 1 is Experian, number 2 is TransUnion, and number 3 is Equifax. They all collect and record the same information, but the interface that they use is slightly different. So it's really important that you start getting into the habit of looking at all 3, because you can ask the lender that you're trying to work with which credit bureau they might be looking at, but they could be using any of the 3. So you just want to make sure that you are paying attention. That's a good question, Carly. Where can you find your credit report? Annualcreditreport.com is the official website to use to request your credit report. It's a pretty easy to use website where you can just go on and request your credit report. And it'll kind of ask you some security questions to get those credit reports. It is free for you to use. And every time you request a credit report, you can only request 1 at a time. And in a year, you can request 3 credit reports. So that's 1 from each credit bureau. So at the Money Spot, we like to recommend that you check your credit report about once every 4 months, just so you are, keeping tabs on yourself and trying to make sure you understand. But 3 times is enough in a year, I feel like. Your credit doesn't change that quickly, especially if you know the other things that you're doing as far as credit goes. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But that is credit reports. Okay. So I was just telling you about credit reports, but I feel like the thing that most people are a little bit more familiar with is the credit score. And I think it's really important that you know about both of them, but know that the credit score is like a snapshot of you at a particular moment in time, whereas your credit report shows a more extensive history. So you need to use them in conjunction with each other, but know that your credit score is just some numbers and it's not going to tell you everything about you, whereas your credit report will have not everything, but it'll have a lot of information about you to kind of read through and understand, and it'll kind of show a more full picture of what your credit score is showing. So the official credit score is the FICO score, and it uses the scale that you can see on the screen. So it goes from 300 to 850, but there are a few other credit score organizations, like the Vantage score, which I believe is the credit score that like Credit Karma uses. So it's good to familiarize yourself with that one as well. It does use a slightly different formula, so the numbers won't exactly match the FICO score numbers, but it'll be a pretty close estimate. And again, it's just to help you gauge kind of where you are. So I feel like it's very important to say that checking your credit score does not hurt you at all. It's actually really good for you to check your credit score, as well as checking your credit report. Like those things don't hurt you. They're there to help you. So if people are out there telling you that it's a bad thing, it's not. So credit scores are good. So when you look at the credit score, and you're even looking at your credit report, to kind of understand the different details that it provides to you and to kind of understand where those numbers are coming from, there's 5 categories that you want to be like thinking about. So number 1 is payment history. That is by far the most important thing that's used to help assess your credit score. And that's basically where you think about, did I pay on time? Did I pay every time? Like I was saying before, like that's where that is shown. So it's really important for you to get into that habit of paying on time every single time, because when you don't, it does show on your credit report and will be reflected in your score. So if that means that you need to be making more payments or kind of like figuring out how to do automatic payments, something like that, to make sure that you're not forgetting, because it is such an important aspect of credit. The next thing to think about is credit utilization. So that's kind of where you get into that idea of credit limits and how much credit is available to you versus how much you're actually using. That's what that is. So you want to, or let me start here. So you will, when you get credit, you're given like a credit limit per se, right? So it might be $1,000 credit limit. While all of that money is available to you every month, it's really not in your best interest to be using that full $1,000 every single month. Ideally, you want to be using 30% of that $1,000 limit. So that's $300 in a month. I do recognize that for every person, that's not always possible, but you want to try to get as close to that 30% number as you possibly can, just because that's showing that you're a responsible credit user and that you are not overspending or spending more than you feel like, or more than the credit card company or the lender feels like you can pay back in a timely manner. So that is credit utilization. The next thing that you want to think about is credit length, or the length of your credit history. So for a lot of college students, they're like, oh man, I've had a credit card for a couple of years now. Like my credit history is so long. It's actually not in the grand scheme of the world. If you're thinking about the length of your life, a few years really isn't that long, but it's really important for you to like keep up that credit history. So you want to have credit for as long as you possibly can, especially if you don't quite know when you're going to be going for that large purchase. If you have like gaps in your credit history, that doesn't always show that you are a long-term responsible customer. So you want to be working really hard at that. So that means that if you have like credit cards specifically, you don't really want to be closing them unless you really, really have to. So like if you got a credit card like in college and it's like a college card, you don't necessarily want to be closing that card because you're not in college anymore. A lot of times what happens with those like college cards is that the bank might like switch your card over. So it's like a regular credit card. So you want to make sure that you're checking into those types of situations to make sure that your credit history is not being cut off at the end of college per se. So I said that you don't really want to be closing out any credit accounts. That's the case unless you're in a situation where your credit card has fees attached. Like if it has fees, I think it's okay for you to want to close that account, especially if it's costing you money and you're not using it anymore. That makes sense. Or if you get into a situation with secured credit, I could see how you would want to close that account and get your money back. But otherwise, you want to keep your credit open as long as possible, even if it's something you're not using anymore that much, like doing what you have to do to maintain the card to make sure that the credit card company also isn't canceling your card on you because you're not an active customer anymore. It's like I was just talking about wanting new cards. The last parts that play into your credit score and your credit report are types of credit and new credit. And those things are related to credit diversification. So like I said, it's really natural for you at some point in your life to want new forms of credit, or if you think about like wanting to buy a large item, like a large purchase, and you need a loan for that or like a mortgage, that type of thing, that is a type of credit that you are applying for. So that's really good. And in the long run, it'll really help your credit history. But at the time when you are applying for that new form of credit, you kind of want to be aware of what else is happening around you, because every time you apply for a new form of credit, that lender that you're trying to work with is running a hard inquiry on your credit report, like I said, where they are thoroughly analyzing every single thing that you've been doing with your credit over the past few years, to make sure that you are someone that they actually want to work with and that they feel like is going to be a good customer for them. So when you are running that, or when they're running that hard inquiry, it does negatively impact your credit score. So you might like see your score drop a little bit. And even on your credit report, it'll show up as like they've run a hard inquiry on your credit. So that being said, you don't want to be applying for too many forms of new credit at one time. So you want to make sure you're giving yourself like a little bit of time to recover from those hard inquiries. So my rule of thumb is if you're like applying for a new form of credit, try at one place. If it doesn't work out, maybe try at a second place. But if it doesn't work out that second time, maybe give yourself like a little bit of a break, like 6 months to a year, especially depending on what the large purchase might be. If it's something that you can wait on, or if it's a little bit more of a want, definitely wait on it if it doesn't work out the first few times, to give yourself that time to recover. So it's really important that you're just being mindful of credit and trying to make sure that you're not applying for credit that you don't actually need, because you don't want to be getting into that situation where you have all this credit that you don't really need and you're not really using it. And then it's like too much to juggle, too much to manage. Okay, so in preparation for large purchases, you might want to think about, how can I build up my credit? Like if I'm a little bit lower on that scale that we showed, like what can I do to make sure I have really, really good credit? So, or if you are new to credit. So the first option and most common option that people go for is unsecured credit. So that is when you apply by yourself, and they give you that form of credit. So that could be a credit card, it could be a loan, any of those types of things. Or it's like the stereotypical like credit that you are probably very familiar with. So that's usually how people go. But in some cases, when you're building credit, that just might not be the most appropriate option for you. So there's a few other things that you can do. So the first thing is secured credit. So that could be secured loans or secured credit cards. And it's where you put up your own money as collateral. And it's to help you start like building good credit habits in like a slightly more safe situation. So that would mean like you give the bank like $500, and they'll give you like $1,000 as like a loan or something like that. And then so you have that money to spend. But if for some reason you're not like making the payments as you're supposed to be, or you get into like a credit default situation or something like that, the bank can then take that money away from you if you're not doing what you're supposed to do. So it's kind of like a more safe situation, because like if for some reason you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, like we talked about on the last slide, they'll kind of pull the credit away from you to like kind of stop you from going down too far of a rabbit hole with like improper uses of credit per se. So that's one option that you have. And the second option that you have is becoming an authorized user. So that's basically where you find somebody that you feel really comfortable with and is like good with credit, and they give you access to their credit card. So you know, like might have a credit card with your name, but it's attached to their account. So that's like a credit card with training wheels. Now, that being said, you really want to be careful with becoming an authorized user on somebody else's credit card, because any actions that you take with that credit card not only impact you, but also impact them and vice versa. So if for some reason you don't do what you're supposed to do, or you might overspend on the card, that negatively impacts you and them. So you just want to be really, really careful and make sure that that's really the way that you want to go, because it can be a little bit more to manage. And then you have to manage your relationship with that person too. It just becomes a little bit more complicated. So secured and unsecured credit are like, you don't have to worry about that kind of thing. So that was building credit, and this is improving credit. So this is more things that you can do to kind of help yourself. So number one, you want to work on paying down your debts. It's really important that you try to keep those, like that credit utilization at or below 30%, to try to make sure that you are able to pay off that amount of money every single month. So then you're not getting into that habit of developing like credit card debt, that type of thing, because then that's another thing that you have to be working towards paying down. And like I said, with debt to income ratio, when you're applying for a loan or for a mortgage, that's something that they're looking at. So if you have a high debt to income ratio, then they might not be as willing to lend to you, or you might have higher interest rates, or you might not get the full amount of money that you're looking for. So you want to be trying to keep that in mind. Like, what can I do to put myself in the best light to whoever I'm applying credit with? The next thing that you can do is make extra payments. Like I was saying with payment history, that is very, very, very important as far as showing that you're responsible. So if you are struggling with paying the full amount when it's due at the end of the month, or whenever your payment period is, try making like smaller, more frequent payments, because that again will help get you on the right path, and it'll kind of show up on your credit report as, oh, like they've made like more payments, and they'll be able to kind of see how often you're paying, that type of situation. And lastly, you can request for a credit limit increase. I say that, but I also say that if you're already not doing those other things that we talked about to put yourself in as good of a credit light as you can, people might not be willing to increase your credit. So you just want to be really mindful of what else you're already doing. But when you do request and get accepted for a higher credit limit, it can bring down your utilization, right? Because you have more total money available to you. But as long as you're keeping to that original utilization like number that we kind of talked about already, like where whatever 30% is for you, if you're sticking at that number, even as your credit limit increases, your utilization will go down. And that again reflects positively on you. Okay, so I think one of the last things to talk about as far as making large purchases goes is things to avoid. So number one, you want to avoid predatory lending practices. So that could be high interest rates. You want to be mindful about interest rates that are like higher than 10%, I would say. Just because you want to be like, if it's higher than 10%, like there might be some other things going on that you need to kind of be aware of. But it can depend a little bit on the credit that you're like the amount of like money that you're asking for, and that loan length, like we talked about. So you just want to be really, really mindful of all of those types of situations. You also want to be like keeping your eye out for additional fees or like hidden words in contracts and stuff like that. You really want to make sure that you are paying attention and reading all of those things to be mindful of what else they might be adding into that contract. So read it really, really thoroughly, and then maybe bring another person along with you when you're applying for that loan or for that mortgage or whatever, just to have somebody else like be on the lookout for those predatory lending practices. It really helps to have somebody keeping an eye out for you as well. So,
and I would say do your research beforehand as well on what you want to purchase. So like, for example, if you're looking to buy a car, especially like a used car or even a new car, thinking about, okay, you know, what's kind of the going rate for this? We have the benefit of the internet, so we can take a look at, okay, what have other people paid for this? What are the interest rates looking like? So that you come in with some knowledge of what you're expecting and what you want from the seller.
exactly. And then lastly, you want to avoid things like payday and title loans. Payday loans are basically where you get a cash advance on like your paycheck, but then it might have, so that's really great because you're getting that money up front and you might need it to pay for things. But you want to be really, really mindful with things like that because they might have shorter repayment periods, and that might have like really high interest rates. So you might end up paying significantly more money back to whoever you lent it from than you originally borrowed. So just be really, really mindful of that because that can get pretty sticky pretty fast.
And when we say high interest rates, we don't mean just like over 10%. We mean about 300% interest rate. So
right. So that's a lot of money. So just be really, really mindful with that. And then title loans is basically where you put up your car title as collateral for the loan. And if you, again, don't pay back the loan, they take your car title. So I'm sure that you need your car to get from point A to point B. You don't want to run into situations with car titles. So be mindful of those title loans and try to avoid those situations where you can with like some of the other things that we talked about with like good credit practices and paying close attention to your cash flow and preparing emergency funds and thinking about those unexpected things. Okay, so that basically wraps up our presentation on large purchases. But if you enjoyed our presentation today or have any more questions for us at the Money Spot, or you want to talk more about your specific situation, this summer we are offering virtual appointments, but with limited hours. So if you have more questions about that, definitely reach out to us at our website or our email address, or even on Instagram. We're posting a lot of really great content, and we have a lot of resources available on our website and additional things that might be able to help you. But I think that's all I have. Thank you so much.